the conversation we're going to have today. For recording purposes, today's date is Thursday, April 16th, 2026. The panel time is 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And the panel title is anyone out there? Are nonprofits facing extinction? Now, before we get started, I'd like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you. Once again, welcome to CWA and today's discussion. Before we dive in, just want to ask attendees to remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions, signs, banners, noisemakers, and any other audible disruptions that are not permitted and will result in those responsible. At any point throughout the 70-minute discussion that we have, it's very possible that I will include audience questions in the midst of our broader discussion. So again, this is going to be fairly dynamic. And before we dive in, I want to have all of our panel members introduce themselves, and I'll start, but give ourselves about 2.5 minutes to introduce ourselves again and answer the question, what is the current state of nonprofits? So again, my name is Devin Gray, president of End Poverty in California. I think what I want to start off with is, I think it's important for us as, us and the audience to understand that when we're talking about nonprofits as an industry, we're not talking necessarily or exclusively about small nonprofits. The nonprofit industrial complex, as we like to call it, has organizations with massive budgets, with broad reach, with really important service delivery responsibilities. But we are in a moment where the civil sector broadly and nonprofits specifically are certainly under attack from the federal administration. And we've seen that in a number of ways, which we'll get into. But there is a paradox, in my view, of the nonprofit industry right now, where because of decisions that are being made by federal lawmakers, not limited to, of course, the $1 trillion cuts to Medicaid that are coming in January, the need for nonprofits and community-based organizations to step in to fill that gap has never been higher. And yet simultaneously, we are seeing external forces, whether it be the threats from the federal administration, contractions within philanthropy, and other structural issues, make it harder for CBOs and nonprofits to step into that role, which I think the field desperately needs. So I think that is a tension that we are grappling with that I hope that we can get into as we continue this conversation. So Lynn, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Hi, it's great to see everyone here. I'm curious who's in the room and to get some sense of what might have drawn you to this issue particularly. Are there people who have worked for nonprofits in the course of their... A lot of you. Okay. What about people who've received services from nonprofit organizations? A few of you. Okay. That's really interesting to me. I have in my own background, as I was saying to someone earlier when we were in the green room, the longer you live, the more lives you've lived. I'm sorry, yes. Is this better? Okay, great. So I have worked in the nonprofit space really nearly my entire adult working life in a number of different capacities. As a young woman, I ran a community mental health center. I have a background in clinical psychology. I also have a background in photography and art. I started a consulting business working with nonprofit organizations, philanthropic institutions, the arts and culture arms of government, et cetera, which allowed me to found my own organization, which is a media arts organization, now about 32 years old, that works with low-income young people from throughout Los Angeles. And I talk about both sort of the consulting work and the work of engaging with other organizations, both very grassroots and some of the larger nonprofit institutions, because I think I hope to bring a unique perspective of having worked inside and consulted from the outside with nonprofits. In normal times, whatever those are, particularly when you're working in a nonprofit, and I think that's really important. I'm not sure any time ever quite feels like normal time. I don't think I'm not sure that there are, a string of years where everyone's feeling like things are flowing pretty smoothly and there aren't a lot of challenges. But in normal times, we'd be talking about all the persistent demands that always face nonprofit organizations: funding, staffing, how are we going to evaluate impact, how are we going to pay our staff and keep our staff happy, how do we stay connected to the communities that we're serving, how do we activate our board, et cetera. But today, all of these issues, which continue to be central, I think, to the to the experience of running a nonprofit organization, sits in a hyper-disruptive political environment. We all know that. There are executive orders, so on top of all the usual, we're looking at executive orders, memoranda, legal challenges, decreased or completely rescinded federal dollars, and more, which puts missions, programs, staffing, and even the language that we use to describe our work under threat. I believe it's a systemic attempt to dismantle our sector. What will be gained from that? I confess I have a difficult time understanding the strategy. We know that it was part of a plan that was implemented as soon as the new administration took power. I wanted to share with you a quote from Diane Yentl, who's the CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits, on nonprofits. This was in response to a presidential memo that was signed by the president last fall, targeting the nonprofit sector specifically, and our potential concerns about our potential links with terrorism, since terrorism has been one of the wrappings that has been used to try to decimate certain sectors and impact our rights. She says, targeted attack on nonprofit that oppose the administration's priority and ideology, denigrating nonprofits, portraying them as enemies of the American people, falsely accusing nonprofits of fueling radicalization and political violence. So that's quite a context to be trying to respond to all the usual challenges of our work. She also says, this is a blatant attack on one of the core principles of our democracy, freedom of speech. It undermines the life-saving work of millions of nonprofit staff and volunteers and puts them at risk. It is truly a dark and difficult time in the nonprofit space. And in answer to the question posed in the title, are we facing extinction? Yes, for some, but not as a sector. We know, as just one significant example, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting shutting down as an example, and the impacts on public television and public radio. Are we facing what seem to be, and in fact are, existential challenges? We absolutely are, but extinction, absolutely not. And I don't say this just as a matter of faith. Maybe it's a matter of faith, but I think it is. I think it is, having seen the cyclical nature of running nonprofits, of funding, of politics, and their impacts on the nonprofit sector. And I think this is so important, and this ties for me to feeling some hope in this time. I think people, communities, and individuals in the nonprofit sector are incredibly resilient and have proven that over and over and over again. COVID, let's say, as one recent example, strong nonprofit leaders are highly creative, highly entrepreneurial, which is something they rarely get recognized for, and are accustomed to doing a lot with very, very little. And most are motivated much more than money, although I advocate for reasonable salaries and pay, but most of us are motivated by not just by money, but passion for our mission and commitment to our community and to the causes that are so important to us. I also, sometimes I think, and I'll wrap in 1 second and pass it on. Sometimes I think this has never happened before, and that's what becomes most terrifying. And then I reflect back, including outside of, just a little bit outside of my own lifetime, in my parents' lifetime or in my grandparents' lifetime, and I think of all the ways in which elements of what we're experiencing right now have in fact gone on before. And, I think about McCarthyism, which impacted my parents and the family I grew up in, and then became a part of my story. And the attack on the nonprofit sector, especially that we're dealing with civil rights and democracy, et cetera. And I go, okay, well, that was a terrifying time, and we came through it. So that's my hope message after talking about some of the existential dangers for the sector. That sometimes when things are broken, even when they're broken for all the wrong reasons, what emerges can be quite innovative, might strengthen us, and I think there will be a positive, there will be a positive path forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really pleasure for part of this panel. So my journey, I used to be a teacher in South Africa, in Cape Town, and I saw a need in teachers that they were struggling to use computers, and it was a transition of the government to a new curriculum. So I started selling refurbished computers, and I could see the need of the need of access to skill. I started opening up centers and training centers. It opens, a space now for the community to walk in, to look for employment, to get a skill, and study further, start their businesses. So over the years, and I've built some centers now across the township and rural areas where people can able to work in, have kind of access to computers. We've trained more than 100,000 young people now working in call center, in the government departments. But over time, I realized not everyone will be able to get the employment because of the economy that is not doing well. So the future, it's on the entrepreneurship. So with the constraint also around how I get involved with the NGOs. So because in South Africa, we don't have 501s like in US, which allows you to become like kind of a social entrepreneur. So it's either you're a business or you're an NGO. So there's nothing in between. So it was a constraint even in our growth. And so I have to leave the business, to focus now on the foundation, which is an NGO now, to work with the entrepreneurs. So I started working with the entrepreneurs in the township to support them so that they can able to start and run and grow their businesses, so that they can able to absorb the students that were training them so that they can give opportunities. So whilst I was doing this work, and I become exposed now to the work of Schwab Foundation, been named the social entrepreneur, and then also been exposed to the Catalyst Global, and the SCOL and the Shocker, been exposed in terms of and then 2019, all these movement, social entrepreneurs and NGOs, they come together, they form Catalyst to say, we're not going to achieve the SDGs by 2030. So as social innovators and as NGO, we need to come together to be able to achieve the SDGs. It's been 6 years now. It's been seen that it's not going to be possible to achieve the SDGs because you've seen the COVID, it becomes worse, and you've seen that how the challenges are and through that, Africa Forward was established now to focus on Africa now. And so moving from starting my NGO now as from last year, working with the G20, advocating for NGO and social entrepreneurs to be at the seat, because at NGO there's a C20, but there's no a policy looking at social entrepreneurs. So I lead the biggest movement in the continent of Africa now, of about 2,000 members of NGOs who are part of the Africa Forward. And the work is on the policy. And if you look at from the continent of Africa, it's only one country at the moment that has got a policy on social and solidarity economy, which is for NGO, which is Senegal. It's only this year that Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire, they put the policy now. And Ghana is in the process of putting that policy. And that policy is part of the African Union, which is a 10 years, African Union strategy to support the NGOs now. So that's kind of like the work I do. For the first time last year, being involved African Union with the World Economic Forum, we did a study in Africa, a state of social entrepreneurs, state of NGOs. And we're able to say there are about 2.2 million of the NGOs in the continent. They bring up almost about 96 billion, turnover. It's been 65% driven by women, and 15 million has been employed by the NGO. So NGO employs as many people that are part of the NGO. But the biggest problem that we've seen from the study, it's fragmentations. There's a fragmentation, it's a small scale, under pressure for funding. Some of the NGOs, funders and organizations, they are burnout in terms of running the organization because of the magnitude of the problems. So I'm working in the space now to mobilize, all this of NGOs now, because the solution is unity of the NGOs. It cannot be solved by one organization. Everyone has to be part of the ecosystem to able to influence the policy, funding, and able to show that the future of the employment will come in on the NGOs, will come in on the social entrepreneurs. That's why it's much more important now. So that's the work that I'm kind of seeing it, all of these kind of challenges, and why it's so important, and how from a government point of view, government work at scale, but NGO work with the solution. They're on the ground, they see the problems, they can solve the problem easier. That's why we need this NGO, that's why we need the social entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexa. I'm really honored to be here, so I'm excited to be with my fellow panelists. I am the co-founder and CEO of Her Drive, which is a period poverty organization dedicated to granting access to menstrual hygiene products for populations in need. In total, we've been able to donate over 1.3 million products nationwide and globally in the UK, Canada, and Mexico for populations that are typically hidden from public sight, so indigenous communities, low-income students, and also immigrant detainees and prisoners. I think typically organizations in our space are more focused on people experiencing poverty and homelessness generally, and so that's why I wanted to do something a little bit different with Her Drive. I will say that given how the federal administration is antagonizing nonprofits, Her Drive has been unique in that it's kind of been resistant to this because the majority of our donations are crowdsourced because we use social media in a very distinct, novel way, I would say. In 2020, which is when we were founded, I launched our TikTok. And I know, now when I tell you, oh, nonprofits have TikToks, everyone's like, well, of course they have to. You have to adapt. But at the time, it was not the most professional thing to do. But I still wanted to do it because I saw there was so much traction on that platform and it was so new, so it makes it easier to kind of engage and get followers. So I posted a 10-second video, and it was if you have tampons or period products, DM us for a shipping label, and I'll send you a shipping label, and then you can send it to us for free. From a business perspective, this was the worst idea ever. I think from a marketing perspective, it was very strategic because I had people transfer from TikTok to Instagram, which was the platform at the time for mutual aid. If everyone remembers during the Black Lives Matter movement, Instagram was a really impactful platform. So I got people to transfer onto our social media, and then we just got tons of engagement. At one point, after 48 hours, I was personally creating these labels. I was responding to messages, and I was like, okay, maybe this isn't so sustainable. Let me try a new strategy. So then we continue to use TikTok in like this young, fun way. And our volunteer base is like 95% middle schoolers through college students who are now running these drives in their own communities. So I think my advice, I guess, in this space is one, be able to like be open to these new tools for marketing, because the young generation, like they are the future, and they actually have a lot more power than I think we give credit. Like they are directing 95% of the distribution in their local communities. Take advantage of community partnerships. I think this makes you resistant to like shifts in the federal administration, because a lot of the organizations that we work with, they're doing very similar things, but it doesn't make sense for us to be operating independently. And that's something that I recognized pretty early on. I don't have personal access to these ICE detention facilities. I need organizations that have that knowledge. I don't have access to the Chicago public school system. I need organizations that know how that distribution works. And so we identified that pretty early on, and then we're able to target these hidden populations. And the other thing I would say is, in terms of getting traction, it's really important to identify the smallest common denominator that will resonate with people, especially at this moment. So in general, I'm very interested in reproductive justice, but I think period poverty is a strategic issue because it is something that the majority, like half the population, can resonate with. So I can reel people in and be like, hey, you don't have pads or tampons, like that's a health issue. And people are like, I can identify with this, like I understand that, and it has a very clear solution. And then I can get into broader conversations about abortion, about contraception, but it's not as complex from the get-go. And so that for us is our smallest common denominator, and we've been able to strategically use that to like attract a variety of different populations.
Tough acts to follow, my God. Anyways, my name is Dr. Kerry Magro. I'm from Jersey City, New Jersey. I thought I would do something a little bit unorthodox and start my intro with a poem. So this poem I'm about to share with all of you is called Only If You Knew Me. If you knew me, you would know I was non-speaking at 2.5. You would know I was diagnosed with autism at 4. You would know I got kicked out of 2 therapeutic preschools because they said they didn't know how to control my quote-unquote behavior. You would know I had extreme sensory integration difficulties. You would know I would lash out to get attention when I couldn't communicate on my own. You would know I twirled my hair. You would know that when I was in school, my peers labeled special education wrong instead of special. Sorry. You would know I spent hundreds of hours a year in therapy to get me to where I am. You would also know I spent hundreds of hours a year being bullied because of my diagnosis. And you would know that people would say in similar cases to Kerry that because of the severity of his autism diagnosis, that college would not be possible for him. But if you also knew me, you would know I graduated from college. You would know I received a master's degree with a scholarship from the National Speakers Association to become a full-time certified public speaker. You would now know I received my doctorate in education, so I one day could be an adjunct professor to teach about our very special community. You would know I started a nonprofit organization at 23 years of age. You would know that we provided 162 partial scholarships to autistic students to pursue post-secondary education. You would know we've provided 25 small business grants to businesses that hire individuals with disabilities. You would know we've given grants to special education teachers, aides, and therapists to support their classrooms across the U.S. You would now know I have a full-time job. You would know I've consulted on several major motion pictures and TV shows to bring a realistic portrayal of disability to our entertainment industry. You would now know I work as the autism consultant for Netflix Love on the Spectrum US. You would know I live independently. You would know I consult to help parents who have children with disabilities as part of my nonprofit. You would now know I'm a full-time professional speaker, life coach, and best-selling author. You would know I love my community and everyone who is truly trying to fight for nonprofits in our society today. But most importantly, you would know that I'm Kerry. And no matter what autism means or doesn't mean, I'm just trying to be the best me I can be. Only if you knew me. If you're listening to this today at this conference and are interested in supporting the nonprofit world, know that your support can directly change the lives of those in our community, whether it's through donating, advocating, bringing in speakers like myself to continue these conversations, or simply by spreading awareness. You are helping organizations like mine continue to make a difference every single day. And for someone out there, that difference isn't small. It's everything. As we continue to have larger conversations about the nonprofit world, here are the statistics. This year alone, we have seen over 60% of nonprofits either flatline or decrease in terms of funding, and in some areas, it's up to 80%. This is why, and in my line of work, the power of storytelling can effectively make change for our nonprofit organizations. Become an advocate, support, and for everyone who loves and supports a nonprofit, be bold, because that will help hopefully make effective change for our nonprofits now and in the future.
I think we've got a great panel, right? Folks touch on a range of things, and one of the things I'd like for us to dive into next is sort of the structural deficits that exist within the nonprofit sector. These things are not new, especially for those of us who have relied on institutional philanthropy to fund our organizations. And what I mean by institutional philanthropy, imagine foundations that have large endowments that give out 5, 6, 7-figure grants to nonprofits where there is a real professionalism. It's not just individual charity of $20 monthly recurring donations, but we're talking about big grants, right? Many of those structures include things like, or these deficits include short funding cycles. You get a grant for 1 to 2 years. It's not necessarily the case that you're going to be getting that as ongoing funding. You have to reapply for your grants every cycle. That constrains your ability to form fiscal reserves, so you can't really save for a rainy day. You have to spend the money or you don't get a renewal. Chronic underfunding for our operating costs. An over-reliance in many issue areas for a small population of foundations that give to causes that align with your mission. These are all things that make it very difficult for nonprofits in the United States, and I would imagine abroad as well, to grow. Folks have talked about different structural remedies. Lynn, you sort of alluded to some things with respect to the philanthropic landscape. Lavuyo, I'm curious to see sort of how the philanthropic landscape is working in context outside the United States. Alexa, you talked about how you crowdsourced for your operation rather than probably relying on institutional philanthropy. Maybe that's something that our field needs to lean into as well. Carrie, you talked about the decrease in flatlining of funding for so many nonprofit organizations. I'm really curious to see how y'all are looking at just what the landscape is for organizations that rely on such a small segment of the ecosystem for such a large portion of our fiscal support. And what can we do to change the structure to make it easier for nonprofits to survive in tumultuous times? Because I think, again, these structural challenges have been around forever, or at least for the last couple of decades in our field, but the exacerbation of these issues comes when the federal government becomes oppositional rather than supportive.
I just have a couple of things that I'd like, can you hear me? Get up closer. That I'd like to say about that. One, I think that the nonprofit sector and its partnerships with foundations is a very, it's a delicate kind of relationship,
Yep,
right?
Definitely.
And it's not realistic necessarily to think that people in the nonprofit space have a lot of influence over people in the philanthropic space. Those of you, since there's a lot of people in the audience who have worked in the nonprofit sector, you may know that over the last decade or so perhaps, there have been some leading foundations that have really tried to move their field in terms of understanding that they were partnering with their nonprofit with the nonprofit organizations they funded, to stop thinking about them just as these grantees through which they deliver their philanthropy, but partners in supporting the arts, providing services for unhoused people, supporting immigrants, et cetera, whatever the missional alignment is. The percentage of, and those people, those foundations also, they try to shift the dynamic and the relationship. I don't know if you can all ever fully shift the power dynamic when one's giving the financial resources, right? Looking at unrestricted giving, respecting the people who are leading the organizations or who are deep in their communities enough to give them funds to spend as they need to spend them. I was telling Devin that I read a great piece by Abigail Disney last night, actually, an heir to the Disney fortune, and she was and has been for many years highly critical of the philanthropic space. And she talked about, despite this effort from philanthropic peers from private foundations to shift the conversation, give unrestricted dollars, build partnerships, et cetera, very few foundations are actually doing that. So it's been kind of a thing. I think those of us doing the nonprofit work thought, great, this is a really great trend. She also talked about lack of courage, and I thought that was really interesting. She said, in this time and in the ways that what is going on politically and the ways in which we're impacted are really being borne by our nonprofit partners, we need to bear some of that pain as well. It's not acceptable to say, by law, we only need to give 5% from our earned income. Give more. Take on some of the burden. Show some courage, because this is a time that really requires it. And people and communities are doing it every single day and shouldn't be doing it alone. I do just want to say one other thing, which is that during COVID, a couple of interesting things happened in terms of funding. I think as we all sat there wondering whether we had primarily federal funding or private dollars or whatnot, whether we were going to lose our funding, have to fire staff, have to possibly even shut down, a couple things happened that were really interesting. One, the federal government stepped up. So it's complete opposite from what's going on right now. The federal government stepped up in really significant ways. My joke was, I wish we could continue to have these kind of financial funding partnerships with the federal government, but without the crisis. But the philanthropic sector, at least in Southern California, I can say, and I think this is true in other parts of the country as well, also stepped up. They networked with one another to create new and bigger pools of money. Many foundations gave more than they were legally required to do. They understood that they couldn't be a part of tearing the fabric of our communities. That's not happening right now in quite the same way, and I surmise, I don't know, that some of it may be because of the fear that people are feeling across so many sectors about being targeted and attacked, that feels riskier than it did just a few years ago in response to COVID.
Yeah, and I'll add, and appreciate that, Lynn, and I'll add, that fear is not an imagined thing. We've seen organizations, are people familiar with the fiscal sponsorship model at all in nonprofits? Essentially, it allows for, it's a central hub of an organization that allows for many smaller projects to use them for financial and HR backend, things like that. So it allows for smaller projects to be stood up. We're a fiscally sponsored project by Tide Center. Maybe people are familiar with Arabella Advisors. They have been heavily investigated by the Trump administration. Arabella had to rebrand and sort of ship some of their projects off. Other fiscal agents have done the same thing. So the fear is not just imagined. It's not just the memoranda and the executive orders. There's a real weaponization of the IRS and other government agencies as well. And Lynn, I appreciated all the remarks. I think we have seen a real move, at least rhetorically, in institutional philanthropy to engage in what we call trust-based philanthropy, where the administrative burden of having to engage in very thorough reporting, which takes up so much time and takes you away from the actual mission, recognition that it's actually counterproductive and doesn't yield better outcomes for the people that we serve. Whether that is actually institutionalized in terms of reporting and grant-making practices is, I think, a little bit hit or miss, but nonetheless, I think the culture has changed a good amount in the last decade or so. The question, I think, is really, has it changed enough? So, any other thoughts on the structural constraints around the sector?
So the quite interesting, even in the continent, with the impact of US aid.
Yeah.
that many NGOs were solely depending, especially on agriculture and health and education and human aid. So we're solely, affected. But not only the USAID, which was affected, any other funding partners that were supporting Africa and that is doing with work with America. So they were being scrutinized. So the funding gap, it becomes like huge gaps now in that side. So it resulted in hardship. It resulted in disruption, and some of the programs were being kind of disseminated now, and people were really, affected. It still continue. But it becomes moments of the continent. Asking, the continent, even the NGOs that are there, that the aid, it's not working. Yeah. The dependence is not working now. And it's more how we could transition through this. There's a huge shift that is taking place now, which moving away from the dependence now. And that shift is kind of like being looked at now, how local-led funding, even from the government in the local, that can be able to be looked at. How do we look at patient funding and long-term funding that can able to come and assist with the funding, and how the funding can, and also the NGO can also have an element of sustainability in the entrepreneurial side, in the sense that not only they kind of depending, in that aspect now. So it's shifting the long-term thinking, the space. It's shifting in the dependent side, and it makes even the use of the continent now to see that, how the different ways now, and there's a kind of talk now on institutional funding, sovereign funding, and to look at it and say, instead of like World Bank funding straight the government, which the government doesn't directly fund the community, they could fund, there's the intermediary organizations that are on the ground that becomes network of networks that are able to fund the networks now. So there's a shift that is taking place that is still early, but the hardship is still felt with the impact of USAID.
No doubt. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, yeah, Kerry.
Yeah, I was just going to say and the struggle that I've heard from so many people at this conference when it comes to the nonprofit world right now, it's that they get their funding for their grants from the government, and it's a one-off. It's a 1 year. I think we need to reinvest our philosophy on a lot of the structural funding towards multi-year grant programs, because at the end of the day, how do we have our nonprofits actually grow if we're only doing this one-off structure? In addition to that, I think we also have to think outside of the box when we're thinking about actual passive ways of income for more of our nonprofit organizations, not only from our small nonprofits, but also our national nonprofits as well. What are we doing to find ways around reoccurring revenue models where we can actually see our organizations thrive? We're seeing this in a lot of our nonprofits right now. American Red Cross, we're seeing more organizations doing, and I hack this name every time, I apologize, patrons, where you actually do a $3 5-member membership. We see this with St. Jude's on their $19 a month membership for individuals who want to support the cause. That way, when we have this vehicle, it's not only about the one-off grants, we're focused on an actual revenue model where we are getting annual funds brought in from the people we serve, because at the end of the day, the best nonprofits are the nonprofits that truly are serving to the best qualities of the communities that we serve.
Plus one to that, I think that's really, really well said. We spent some time talking about the structural challenges with the field. In the last few days, and just talking to students and folks in the community, I think there's also been a real curiosity about whether one can find, good pay and a rewarding career in the nonprofit sector. I think the answer is unequivocally yes. I think we would all state that. But I am very curious, as I'm fortunate to be with 4 really successful social entrepreneurs in your own right. Were a student or any person to ask you for advice on whether if they're considering starting a nonprofit or joining the space, what advice would you give folks?
Okay, I think I can speak to this just because that's exactly what I did. Yeah. I was a sophomore in college when I started Her Drive. I think I had the privilege of it being in the middle of lockdown, so I had a lot of time on my hands to set it up. The first piece of advice is something I already said, which is identify who your target populations are and also identify what issue can attract the most people. Because I think in the beginning stages, it's important just to get traction. So for us, we got that traction through social media, especially if it's a student coming to me. I would say, don't be afraid to push the bounds of what you think is appropriate for a nonprofit, because I came into this space really with no background in the nonprofit space. Like, my background's in neuroscience. I'm in law school right now. It's not really my forte. It's just I enjoy like the entrepreneurial side of it. And like I mentioned, it's not like social media was something that was like par for the course for nonprofits, but it ended up working out really well for us. Aside from the crowdsourcing that we get, the other part of our donations are corporate sponsorships. And the way that we get this is because they're seeing us on social media. And I think having such a young volunteer base is interesting to them. Like, we are doing something different. We're not doing something traditional. At our core, Her Drive is a 2-person team. Like, we are small. But at our largest, we have like over 1,400 volunteers that are operating around the US. So it's more of a decentralized model. I wouldn't say it's common. It's probably pretty dissimilar from everyone else's work on this panel, but it's still able to work. So I don't think that you need excess resources, excess knowledge to enter this space. I just think you have to have the willingness to fail and also the willingness to just be as innovative as possible with the limited resources that you have.
Yeah. I would say, on the advice, it's, if there's a cause that you want to start this and NGO, and you solely believe on the NGO and you make a difference, I'll say build a strong sounding board next to you. People that they will bring credibility to you, because it will assist you from a governance, but also you can tap in to the board members that you are bringing in with you now, because they can open opportunities for you because they are. So be okay to find people that are going to challenge you, that are going to be partners. So work with the establishing with the board. And secondly, most of the NGO in the beginning, they depending on the individual. So people buy people. They buy because of your vision and making sure that your leadership and what you give in, people will come in and supporting because they believe in your cause that you are standing on now, because they are kind of supporting you. And then thirdly, share as much of your work. Don't be kind of like moderate, focusing on the impact, focusing on the work. Put the narrative and share what you do. And people wants to support something is moving and something that they can see where it's making much more difference because of and share your stories, show your successes, share the impact, because impact attract many people to work with you.
Similar to Alexa, I started my nonprofit my second year in my master's, and I think there's a specific focus right now on, I can't understate the true need for individuals who are starting this line of work to, like Alexa mentioned, find your base, but also the power of grant writing is so critical for so many of you students to get a little bit of a sense of. There's a great source online, you could just look it up, it's called Nonprofit Finance Fund, which will help you educate you a little bit on the nonprofit world in terms of sustainability. In addition to that, it will also help you look and see where the fundraising gaps in our society due to this the climate that we're currently living. In addition to that, grants.gov is another great resource for all of you to consider, especially you students, which you can literally just do a quick search on based what you're passionate about, because obviously if you are starting a nonprofit, you can't BS it. It has to be something you are truly passionate about, because that, in the world right now, one of the buzzwords we have in our speaker bureaus for 2026 is storytelling. And that's an effective way to make sure that you're actually receiving funding for your nonprofit. So the first two places I would go, go to Nonprofit Finance Fund. It's a great way of getting your feet wet to be able to research as much as you can about the nonprofit world, and then grants.gov or Candid. Candid is another great source for all of our students to consider.
I think that's all really, really wonderful insight. Luvia, what's something you said about board members actually ties into a question we got from the audience, which reads, other than writing checks, what would you say makes a good board member? You touched a bit on the importance of having a board that is credible to other folks, that gives you legitimacy. I think that's super important. I would add, even if they can't write checks, do they have relationships with foundations or other individuals who are in a capacity to cut a check for folks? Curious for other folks, how have the strengths of your board enabled you to progress in your work, and if there are any good anecdotes that might be instructive for folks in terms of constructing their board if they're interested in starting a nonprofit or joining one? Would love to know.
I would say that one of the most important things that a board member can do, aside from individual giving or bringing money in, whether it's through corporate donations or their personal circle, is having a passion for the mission and being true stewards of your organization. And, you know, with my organization, obviously, my board, very few people on my board ever held it in their mind all the time the way I did. And I was always finding opportunities, unexpected people who I would unexpectedly meet, where I felt there was a connection between what we did, and I could foster that kind of connection between what we did and what their interests were. So board members may not be able to do that in the way that the founding director, the executive director does it, but they have to have the passion for the organization, because the worst thing you can have happen is have a board of people who are directing the kind of the broad policy of the organization and who are your boss.
Yeah.
Who show up at the meetings and don't do very much. I like to say also that with boards, there are lots of nonprofit consultants and some foundations. The Annenberg Foundation in LA did this for a while, you know, kind of talking about the best practices of boards. In my experience, and this isn't just with the organization that I founded, but with the many organizations, large and small, that I've consulted with, there's best practices, and then there's what really happens. and they, you know, so understanding that is just a part of, you know, of the human experience when people try to come together and do good work. When parents are involved at a school and 3 parents are doing most of the work, even though 20 people show up at the meetings. Some of that is, so kind of knowing that, I think, is really helpful. And knowing that you have to cultivate relationships with your boards, your board members. They should be your closest circle of volunteers and donors, just as you would cultivate a relationship with someone who might be able to donate or otherwise support your organization.
Yeah, so, I mean, most of the NGO, the most challenging part is reporting. It's one of the cumbersome admin work that we have to do some reporting on the NGOs now. And in the beginning, when you start, I mean, you make mistake, you're passionate and you make mistake not being strong on your admin now. So your sounding board and your board will be able to assist you in terms of the best report, how to be able to kind of like, I mean, sharing part of the reporting now. So I see the strength in terms of the board. And secondly, on the accountability. As you run the foundation and you involve, you become accountable. You know, as a kind of like startup, you are the bosses. You know that I choose instead of meet quarterly, I meet every second month, but I know every second month I must prepare well for the board packs to make sure that, I mean, the board can able to kind of like give much more sounding board and also can able to look at the future more than with the current situation that I'm facing now. And then thirdly, brings the credible individuals in your board. I mean, others are good in fundraising, others are also good in terms of technologies, others can good in marketing, or others are good in the reporting. Now, just choose the good members that they will go out and bring much more, I mean, like credibility, and then others it becomes like the patrons. And then fourth, the board must believe in you, because that you go through different times, and sometimes it becomes hard. So if there's no trust and not believe in you with your board, you will find a challenge, especially with your chair, Your chair, it's like a sounding board that we have to make sure that you've got much more tighter, because that's where the cracks comes in when you're not able to kind of you connect with the chair. And the fifth, your board must be our ambassador. They must speak about you when you're not there. So I mean, the conversation can happen with the board and able to kind of like talk about you and use you and make sure that they are advocating about your work.
Yeah. Now, to that point, I feel like my board has made connections to philanthropic institutions that have yielded $500,000 to $1 million in our revenue. I mean, and just by being good ambassadors, I think that's such a great point. Do either of you want to jump in on that one, or I'm happy to move on to another one? Great. I love this question. Nonprofits like to share their successes, and Carrie, you talked about the importance of storytelling for being able to talk about our work. Couldn't agree more on that. But the audience member also asks, we can learn from each other's failures as well. What are some successful failures that you've all had, and what are some pitfalls to avoid in these challenging times for NGOs? Any lessons learned along the way?
There's so many. I feel like I continue to make mistakes, but that's how we learn. I think one of the biggest things, and it seems so basic, is don't pretend that like you know every little last thing, because let me tell you, the climate is consistently changing, especially as we look at advancements in artificial intelligence, which I think has a lot of ROI return on investment for our nonprofit sectors, especially as our nonprofits start looking at CRMs, which are also customer relationship management tools, as ways of continuing fundraising for our nonprofits. So understanding, and I think one of my biggest failures was my nonprofit was blossoming 2018, 2019. We had a pretty sizable amount of revenue coming in from corporate partners, government grants, and then COVID hit, and then a lot of our nonprofit funding went by the wayside, similar to what we're seeing right now in our current political climate. So I think the most important thing that I continue saying, it seems like the most basic thing in the world, but don't pretend like you know everything, and continue to learn, be a sponge, continue to break down big tasks into smaller tasks, whether you're using an AI model to break that down, because ultimately that will hopefully help you succeed, and never stop learning.
So for me, the mistake I've done with the board, I mean, it was to work so hard to show the board how amazing I am. So every time I go to the meeting,
I'm sure that wasn't too hard.
Yeah. So I go to the meeting, I'm like, show them this is what we've done, and this is how like the land. And I realized it was a mistake, because over time I kind of like, it's more like a reporting, it's more like a ticking box, it's more like the compliance, that we've got a meeting and we had board meeting, they kind of say, well done. And the mistake was not using the board to the best to assist you. So the lesson I learned from there, that in every board meeting, there are about 3 questions that I have for the board. And those questions are pain points that I'm dealing with. Mm-hmm. So I bring those pain points to the board. So not every operational meetings, but pain points that I'm stuck, I cannot move beyond that, and I bring it to the board, so the board can able to assist to deal with what the board are the sounding and providing direction, so they can able to deal with that. So I learn in terms of now to use the board, and secondly, I also become vulnerable and be honest with the board, because that's where they could understand, because the human beings, they can connect with me when they understand, in terms of like, there are times that I cry when I say it's too much. I don't know how to come about, but I get so much like value because I can be deeper, transparent with myself in terms of that. So the part of like now using, the board that we bring in, it's really becomes taking the load out of you, because leading NGO is hard. Sometimes it's lonely, and you are a leader, everyone look up to you, and you need this sounding board to be with you in all the time. And sometimes you need to differ with them. And sometimes you need to find out that the board gives you some challenges, but it allows you to grow as a human being.
I mean, one thing I'll say as operating as a smaller nonprofit is we don't have a central headquarters because we started during COVID. So all of our meetings with our volunteers happen on Zoom. All the donations that are coming in, they're going to my parents' house and they're upset about it because the garage is full. This is a sidetrack, but I remember getting a text from my mom, angriest text I've ever received. And she was like, "Can you explain to me why we have an Amazon truck outside of your grandma's house and the Amazon driver just told us that everything in the truck is going to her house?" Anyway, so like that is a challenge for us, is like not having a physical space. The other thing too is because we rely on crowdsourcing, when we aren't trendy, when we aren't experiencing like being viral on social media, that equates to a lull in our donations and our support. So part of what I'm trying to figure out right now is how we diversify our funding sources, because a lot of our donations are actually not funding. They're in-kind donations, which are great, but it also makes us kind of vulnerable to shifts in people's perceptions of the organization. We had that boom during COVID. Everyone was feeling like an activist. I think now in 2026, people are feeling really jaded by the state of the world. And when I say period poverty is an important issue, they're like, "Have you seen the news?" Like, there are other things we're concerned about as well. So I've just been trying to do my best to connect our messaging to like the broader issues. But it's difficult. I won't say I figured it out completely.
Thank you. I have a question, Lynn. I suspect you'll have some thoughts on this one. Audience member writes, "As a victim of nonprofit layoffs in DC during the great dismantling we've seen over the last 18 months or so, it's happened last fall for them, said that they were hired by another nonprofit as a fractional leader, i.e. not full-time, no benefits. What are your thoughts on this new trend? One, is it a trend? Are you seeing that in other places as well? And thoughts on it?
Well, I don't know that it's a trend. I do think that I have seen that happening in some organizations. People are trying to figure out how to survive, and I think actually this is a huge issue that nonprofit organizations have been dealing with over the last 6 or 7 years, actually, which is how to pay a fair wage.
Yeah.
How to have the values internal to your organization for the way in which you work and the way staff are managed and how people are supported in the organization that you hope to realize in the communities that you're working in or working with. And I think that's been a real challenge. I know in California, at any rate, you're in DC, that something that constrains, in my opinion, in a positive way, too much fractional hiring and that sort of thing is labor law.
Yeah, definitely.
And the other is, I think, it's often something that nonprofit directors will look at. Well, our greatest operating cost is our salaries and our rent.
Yeah, by a mile.
Where are we going to cut? Everything else is so thin. So it's really, but it is often, not always, really short-sighted to think that, the kind of fractional employment that you're talking about or cutting staff or core staff is the best route to go. And that's where it really demands that, that to me tells me that that leader, director is feeling a lot of panic.
Totally.
And not thinking clearly, and needs to think about the long-term impact of kind of tearing apart the staffing of their organization. So I don't know that that's helpful for you specifically in terms of your experience, but I see it as a part of the conversation that's been going on for maybe the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the part of the NGO. It's always been a challenge that you cannot able to compete with the private sector and the government because you're not able to pay. What is been able to be offered. What I've seen, if you share the vision, there's a buy-in, you communicate, you have, as a leader, interested in your people will be able to believe in you, even if you're not paying them well, because of their believing in the cause that you like. So if you invest on the people, and secondly, invest on the well-being of the people that we have it, because that's what's your asset that you need it to like. And then thirdly, be transparent, share with everything. Don't hold some things, because once you're able to be transparent, people can understand, they understand the numbers, and that's how the buy-in comes in, because they know the situation. Instead of you as a leader sit with the challenges, not even sharing with your team, and the team, they kind of see the risk, because the risk is more, it's a kind of security, how my salary is going to be paid. But if you kind of share with that, it minimizes. It doesn't mean that they won't go away, but it just means that they still continue believing, and they will know that in a tough time, you could turn the corner, and people believe in leaders in the organization, and your leadership, you must be showing that leadership. That's how you're able to lead, and they can see from you that your sincerity, authenticity as a leader, they can believe in you.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question that I'll take a stab at, but then Carrie, I'm going to throw it to you as well. The audience member asks, there are so many nonprofits that compete for the same dollars but have very different agendas. How does one make itself stand out in the crowd? I think it's a big challenge. Obviously, it's a very crowded ecosystem. I think we all recognize that. I think sometimes the issue is that we have similar agendas, frankly, and that there are similar issue areas because the mountain that we're trying to climb is so high. I would say that having a coherent theory of change is critical for being able to stand out, and being able to have some evidence supporting that the theory of change has measurable impact is critical as well, though it's a very difficult thing to do, particularly if you're a newer nonprofit trying to introduce a different model via your theory of change. But Carrie, I'm curious how you're approaching that question.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because currently, right now, in our current climate, what I see a lot of smaller nonprofits doing is saying this: I have a son or daughter who's impacted by this, this, and this, and I'm going to start a nonprofit because I think I can make a difference. While well-intentioned, and I think there is a lot of great stuff in there, I think also going towards websites like I was mentioning, Nonprofit Finance Fund, and actually learning what nonprofits currently exist in your space, it's so critical. We're not talking about the government sector right now. We're talking about small parent-ran nonprofit organizations. Being able to see what is out there in our society is so vastly important right now, because there is a lot of competition for any business people in the world. We see knockoffs of products every single day. It feels like proprietary is not even a word in our society anymore. Because I feel like a lot of the times we're just saying we're going to do this and it's a great idea, and we don't actually do the research and the background information. For all of you who are joining us today, just to leave you with a measurable thing that you could take away with, if you grab a card after today's presentation, I'll provide you with a list of nonprofit resources and do's and don'ts that I recommend to many of the nonprofit organizations that bring me in as a consultant, just to continue these conversations, because this conversation doesn't end for you guys, obviously, after today's panel. But I think that's the biggest thing, in my opinion, just being able to go and do your research, because there is a lot of copycats out there in our society, and it's just making it much harder for nonprofits to compete.
We have about 5 minutes left. Luvuyo, there was a question directed to you that I think is really interesting, but I keep it to a minute, so I want to get some final remarks. You mentioned collaboration with the African Union. What role can regional bodies like AU, ASEAN, the EU, et cetera, do to promote a stronger role and better funding for NGOs and nonprofits?
It's quite important. From ILO to African Union, through UN to push governments in the countryside to have a policy that supports NGOs and social entrepreneurs. And because they come as a body, and the power that they have, it can unlock more value, and it make it recognized been an NGO or supported by the government now. So for those bodies, if they believe and they support, that's how they can, unlocking now. We see now, on the data now, Africa doesn't have a data now. In terms of understanding, how many NGOs that are servicing now. So coming together, it brings unity, it brings strength, and it makes, the sector of NGO grows. And we need all those like bodies because there's a power, but sometimes the power sit with, and it's a funny thing, last year on the G20, we have the key person who's responsible for the police, and he was part of listening to NGO. He was blown away. He sits on the police but doesn't understand exactly what's like happening on the ground now. So you need this kind of like, all these bodies to be on the ground to understand. One day they are doing this policy, advocacy. They have much more relevance. They're not sitting in the aircons and they don't have any idea what's the reality on the NGOs.
That's great. So we have 3 or 4 minutes left. Would love to get closing remarks from all of our really wonderful panelists. Any closing thoughts that you might have, but I would be very eager to know, in the midst of your thoughts, what is the future of our industry? Carrie, if you don't mind, I'm going to work backwards.
Sure.
Here.
Yeah. I think the future is based on where we, and this is super vague, so I apologize ahead of time, but it's based on our passion of being bold. As many of our panelists have mentioned today, I don't think the nonprofit world is going extinct. I think we're just having to recreate the wheel a little bit when it comes to fundraising. I feel like we need to do a much better job of looking outside the box. What are we doing towards things like Alexa was mentioning, crowdsourcing? What are we doing towards recurring revenue models? What are we doing towards multi-year grants versus one-year grants? So we have a little flexibility when it comes to our funding, and then just continuing to stretch. So I think, and I wrote this down as a closing thought, is so the real question isn't whether nonprofits can keep up, it's whether we're going to align resources with the scale of the challenges they're trying to solve.
I think the future is in young people, so include them in the conversation as much as you can. One of my volunteers is actually a coordinator for this conference, so I think they've gone on to do really amazing things, and when we underestimate their power, that's when nonprofits will face extinction. The other thing I'll say is redundancy is a major threat in the nonprofit space. There are a lot of organizations, like Carrie mentioned, that are doing the same thing. So try to collaborate as much as possible. I think that kind of goes back to another question where, like, how do we navigate this question of extinction? It's by collaborating with nonprofits that make each other look good. So that's what Her Drive does. We work with people, we both look good in the equation, and it benefits us both.
Yeah, the future for me, I'm seeing a stakeholder engagement, which is like government, big business, university, NGOs, social innovators coming together and solve these problems. It's not a problem that can be solved one, because it's complex, but if we can come together and find ways that we can solve the problem, because our concern is one. It's our well-being of our people, well-being of the planet, and also sustainability ourselves now. Coming together, solving this complex problem, it's the future to, solving all this complex, and that becomes a systematic approach when you're dealing with this.
Well, I echo what my colleagues said. I think that they spoke really well to what the future might look like. And what's needed for the future. I would just add that our ability to really remember that we're part of the community that we're serving. We're not outside of the community that we're serving, whatever kind of work we might do, and that there is a lot of power in an activated community. So in that way, if we only think in terms of the nonprofit sector, but if we think about the nonprofit sector and all of the human beings, all the many, many, many human beings who are connected to that sector because they're receiving services or education or arts experiences or whatever it might be, that's a powerful community that's really going to be needed to lift us all up, I think, and to help us to figure out how we can innovate, because we that's sometimes what is kind of going back to what I said earlier when we opened, that sometimes when things are dismantled, even for the wrong reasons, what comes out of it is unexpected opportunity and innovations. And we need to be open to that, not sunk by everything that's going on, but open to that kind of future possibility.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I know we're at time. I think there's two things that stand out to me. One is how we deal with the fragmentation and inefficiencies that exist within our space, and then power as well. On the former, there are a lot of us in this space. I think sometimes our fragmentation, the fact that we are so numerous and yet individually maybe not as strong as we could be, is a potential weak point. And I think that the philanthropic landscape has an opportunity to incentivize mergers that don't lead to workforce being cut within our nonprofit industries, but to see if we can be greater than the sum of our individual parts by coming together. I think that's a real opportunity. Partnerships also, even if it doesn't result in mergers, is obviously our currency in this space too. And then last, I think our space and our industry has to continually be having analysis of how we are building and wielding power. And again, particularly in the American context, where 501c3s are not only limited in the amount that we can lobby, but we're obviously forbidden from doing any kind of political activity. I think it would be really wonderful to see a growth in the 501c4 ecosystem as well, because I think we are constrained as a field in our ability to build and wield meaningful political power. So can we get another round of applause for a wonderful panel? Thank you. And I appreciate everyone's questions. This is the end. Thank you all for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Yes, they remember.